Welcome to another Telltale Books video. Continuing my J.G. Ballard series, I'm going to talk about a short story titled Studio 5: The Stars. The title kind of refers to a place, and the place is in J.G. Ballard's well-known series, Vermillion Sands, which is kind of a... Vermillion Sands is kind of a surreal desert resort, I guess you would call it. An area where people are living. It seems to be on Earth, but it's not sure just when or where on Earth this is supposed to be. It's a very strange place with some very strange creatures. In Studio 5: The Stars, Ballard talks about these manta rays, like live in the ocean, but these aren't in the ocean. They fly in the air, and they're complete with stingers, so you have to be careful of these manta rays. Kind of bizarre. And the landscape, like I say, is like a desert. It's red sand, a very reddish sand. Previous to this story, Ballard only wrote one other story, one of his very earliest stories. It's actually his first published in a magazine story called Prima Belladonna. And I covered that in a video way back. That was his second work, because he did publish a short story in a newspaper also before Prima Belladonna. And I covered both of those. And that was a while ago. So you can look into my back catalog of videos for Prima Belladonna if you want to learn more about that. But you really could approach Studio 5: The Stars from the standpoint of not having read Prima Belladonna, because there really isn't any continuation from Prima Belladonna in this story. It's a self-contained story. Prima Belladonna was originally published in December of 1956 in Science Fantasy magazine. And that was actually the third J.G. Ballard story. Escapement was the second. The Violent Noon was number one. I've got all those covered in my very first Ballard stories. If you go to the J.G. Ballard playlist, you'll see all of them that I've done so far. Studio 5: The Stars is number 15 in my list of J.G. Ballard. And it was published in Science Fantasy magazine in February 1961, so 5 years after Prima Belladonna was published. And the story, of course, I read it in my copy of the complete short stories of J.G. Ballard. It also is available in his very early collection of stories titled Millennium, and it's available in a Carolyn Graff paperback that was published in 1988 called Vermillion Sands. But your best bet is to look for the complete short stories of J.G. Ballard. Plenty of copies of those on the internet that I've seen. So this is the second Vermillion Sands story he published. And the story is very fascinating, especially today with what's going on today with artificial intelligence software. Because in this story, you have a guy that is the editor of a poetry review magazine. This is sometime in the future, indefinitely in the future from 1961. But Ballard doesn't give details on all this. You don't know how far in the future. You don't know where Vermillion Sands is located. And Vermillion Sands is definitely not any place that really exists on Earth. But you don't know if this is like after the bomb or if it's some alternate Earth, or so Vermillion Sands tends to become a complete fantasy world, but with a lot of ties to our real world, which makes it fascinating. And in this particular story, he's focused on art and computers. He uses poetry, but you could substitute for poetry writing fiction, painting paintings, creating drawings, doing graphic design. Any of those kinds of endeavors could be inserted in place of poetry. But in this story, the main character is the editor of a poetry review magazine, and he's living in Vermillion Sands and editing his magazine from Vermillion Sands. And the main character, I didn't jot down his name, so I'm forgetting his name. He gets a new neighbor, moves in next door to him. It's a woman, and she is a poet, and she kind of starts harassing the main character because he's the editor of a poetry magazine, and she has something to prove. She does not like, in this story, it's a computer device that the editor or anybody else who wants to do poetry can enter in keywords, and the device will produce poetry. In meter, rhyming if you want, following correct poetic forms. It'll spit out the complete poem with you just putting in what you want the poem to be about. Sound familiar, right? Now in this story, it's a device, like a box that you have to purchase and have this box and do the inputting on the box. And so poets will input their information. The box will spit out a paper, kind of like a ticker tape. Got to remember, this is 1961. There's a lot of technological developments between then and now that Ballard did not know about, could not have known about. He probably could have guessed, but he didn't. Oh well. He still is basically talking about an AI device that will spit out your poem. So then the poets mail in this ticker tape of the poem to the editor, and the editor then puts it into his magazine and sends it off to the printer. Very much like using something like ChatGPT, but specifically for creating poetry in this story. Well, his neighbor has a problem with the way they're doing poetry, with the way everybody in this world has been doing poetry, because while the device spits out technically perfect poetry, it lacks humanity. It lacks real poetry. It lacks real poetic insight, because it's not a person that's writing the poem. It's a machine. Sounds really familiar, right? That's the whole issue with things like ChatGPT and the DALL-E artwork, is that it is being generated by computer, and it does lack that human soul, so to speak, that is what results in great art. You have to have that human perception. You have to have the human touch in order for it to really reach the level of art. And I'm not saying that someday AI can't be improved to be every bit as good as a human being and put that kind of insight into it and create real poetry and create great art. I think I think it could. But when we get to that point, it's no longer artificial intelligence, it's true intelligence. It's true humanity that you're dealing with in the computers when you reach that level. I think it's possible, theoretically, but we're a long way away from there. And the stuff that's being output right now definitely is not as good as what a human being can produce artistically. Technically, it's really, really good. Artistically, it lacks depth, it lacks warmth, it lacks soul, it lacks insight, it lacks the feeling that a human being would put into it. It's not there. It's not as good as what a human being can produce yet. Someday, but it's not there yet. So this woman starts manipulating this editor and messing with him and basically puts him in a position where he has to accept handwritten poems from her and from this one other guy in order to get his, because he has to produce his magazine or he loses all of his distribution and his printer and everything. He can't miss a month. Well, she messes with him so that he's on deadline and he needs to get a magazine together immediately. And there just isn't time to use this machine to produce the content of the magazine anymore. So he has to accept handwritten poems from her and this one other guy. He's forced into it. And so what she's attempting to do here is force the world to see, to go back to putting the humanity into art and creating poems that you really feel and that really inspire you. That's what this is all about. That's what they are after. Maybe if AI wasn't such a big issue right now, I wouldn't have thought quite so highly of this story, but it is a really big issue. I have read this story before. I really have. But rereading it now, I read it years and years and years ago. Rereading it now with the issues that are going on now, this story absolutely blew me away. It has all of Ballard's typical brilliant writing. It has all the surrealism. It has all the brilliant imagery that I love about all the rest of Ballard's work. It's a very literate story. The characters really come alive. There's a lot of humanity in this story. And it really speaks to what we're going through right now, today, with all the AI software programs trying to do art. And it's discouraging today how many people really think that this AI crap is as good, that they just don't get it. And it's always been a problem that most people just don't get what makes real art. They think, oh, you set an apple on a table and you do a realistic painting of it, that's art. No, it isn't. That's just an exercise. That's not art. That doesn't have any feeling or spirit or soul or philosophy. You need more than just an apple on a table to make it great art. And that's what people don't get, and that's why AI is succeeding so much right now, is that people don't know the general populace really doesn't know the difference between real art and just going through the motions, doing the technique. There are some really excellent quotes that I got from this, something I haven't done for a while. Quote 1. Now that technical mastery is simply a question of pushing a button, there's no need for sacrifice, no ideal to invent to make the sacrifice worthwhile. When I say they have everything to learn, I mean about their own hearts, not about technique. About the soul of music, not its form. And finally, poetry is dead today. Not because of these machines, but because poets no longer search for their true inspiration. And that is just so true to what's going on right now. Ballard is a genius. He had his finger on the pulse of the future. He was seeing this stuff in 1961 and warning us. And so he wrote a truly great short story in Studio 5, The Stars. This is highly recommended. This is a top tale. This is as good as it gets, guys. Go out to regular literary fiction. You're not going to find anything better than this. Ballard is one of the greats. Just because he wrote science fiction doesn't mean he's not better than pretty much anybody out there. This is great stuff. So that's all I have to say about Studio 5, The Stars. Have you read the story? Leave your comments. Leave comments about Ballard in general. And I hope you will hit the like button and the subscribe button if you haven't subscribed at all already. And come on back for more, because there's a lot more Ballard to come. This is still early in his career. That was only his 15th published work. Moving on to number 16 will be a story called Deep End, and I hope you'll come back and join me for that. I'm kind of expecting it's going to be as good. We're in the real meat of Ballard's writing career now. So come on back and join me for more.